And now, with a little bit of clay, we can rebuild you.
Hey, I need your help.
Oh my gosh, what happened to you?
One of your kids tore my arm off.
Okay, I'm sorry that happened. I guess we'll just throw you in the trash and we'll reprint your model because it's easier to do that than to fix you.
No. You're gonna fix me. That's what's easy.
Okay, we'll fix you. Do you know what all of these models have in common? Sure, they're all 3D printed, but that's not what I'm getting at. All of these models were printed and had something fail while they were printing, whether it was the tips of the wings or a clog in the nozzle of my printer as it printed. It could be something as awful as supports just not printing, and so you lose the back end of a model. Any way you look at it, these are partial successes. And what do we do with partial successes?
Throw them away. Throw them.
We use them. We fix them when we can, and if we can't, well, as 3D printers, we repurpose them somewhere, somehow. So let's talk about that today. I'm going to divide this video up into two separate portions. Because whenever we talk about 3D printing, we generally have two different printers that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about your resin printers, which print with liquid, and your FDM printers, which print with a spool of filament. And so we're going to talk about both of them because if you're into 3D printing and for your tabletop, chances are you have one of them. Some of you have both. So, resin. Resin printers are awesome because you get that detail. You get those things that, I mean, you can print on par with most of the major gaming companies that are out there right now. And the quality, well, the quality is as good as the 3D file that you're printing. So, what do you do when something doesn't print out properly? Okay, lots of examples. One of my favorite, and the reason I decided to make this video is because recently I printed this. This is the Lady of the Grove. And I printed this model out, and as you can see, it's got a lot of little pieces, little cool things. Her bow, I printed her out, and half the bow did not print properly. Now, I am one of those 3D printers that prefers to put my own supports on something.
I'm special.
And so, because of that, a lot of my stuff comes out maybe not as good a quality as it would have if I just used the supports that were provided. This model, I'll put a link to the Patreon. This is $1 for the Lady of the Grove. Awesome model for $1, and they come pre-supported, and I chose not to use their pre-supports, and so her bow came out and it didn't work. And you know, a couple other little things happened along the way. I was sad because I like this model. It's a nice big model, and I wanted everything to be perfect on it because I'm going to try my hardest to paint it really, really well. So stick around if you want to see that. We'll be going over painting fur and a bunch of other things. But what do I do? How do I fix it? I didn't want to print the whole model again. It's big. It takes a lot of resin to do that, so I didn't want to do that. So what can I do? In those situations, honestly, what I do most of the time is I print the model and I leave out most of it. I only print what I need. And there's two ways that you can do this. I have a video that talks about cutting models and changing them and making them smaller. Same principle applies for, oh, all I want is the bow. Well, you cut the bow out of it and just print the bow. A link to that video is here. And anyway, the other option that you have is just in your slicer, position the print in a way that the only thing on your build plate is what you need to print. All of that stuff that's below it, all of that stuff in the red, when you hit the button to make the print, when you hit the button to cut the file, slice, that's what it's called. When you hit the button to slice the file, what it'll do is it'll set it up to print whatever's on top. And so it's just a really easy way to print just what you need. Sometimes there's weird ways of getting around it. Sometimes there's things you have to do. And sometimes you'll have to print a little bit of the model that you don't want just to get the piece that you do. But I was able to print just the bottom half of the bow and attach it, you know, with some super glue or resin, whatever you have, and make it so that you can't even tell which part was taken off. And then you have other situations like our ogre friend here. This ogre was printed and the supports didn't stick to the build plate, and so a large chunk of his back was gone. So what do you do? Honestly, with something this bad, I would generally suggest, well, just print it over again. But it was a big model and I was running low on resin, and I had a D&D campaign that was going that weekend that was doing the Hill Giants, so I had to get it ready. So actually, I ended up just playing with it as it was, missing its back, and I hated it, and it fell over, and when it fell over, it broke. So now what do I do? Well, time to get creative. I got out some tinfoil. Tinfoil's cheap. Crumpled it up, pushed it into the back as much as I could, as well as I could, after gluing the two pieces back together. Then using some Milliput, I mixed that together, and I did my best to rebuild the body of this hill giant. This is the second time I've done anything that I would consider a kit bash where I was actually using Milliput or green stuff or whatever you have. This is the second time I've done this, and it turned out really good. At least for me. It's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect, you know, unless you spend hours and hours doing it and you're talented at it, you know, to boot. But with this situation, I was able to get it to the point where he's back up running. I'll prime him, I'll paint him, and you won't even be able to tell that he was born without a back. So resin, those are your options. You can kind of fill them in. You can reprint the pieces that you need. There's not a ton that you can do other than, you know, using clay and things like that to fill in the blemishes, just because you can't melt the resin down and do other things to it. It's just, it's a hard material. You have to do what you can, or just reprint whatever you need. And generally you can find a way to get it in there. Now, something to be said, if you print it out and you know it's bad, print the piece that you need before you cure it, because resin is a lot easier to deal with before you do that final cure. It's a lot easier to cut. It's a lot easier to move around. It's a lot easier to do whatever you need. And when you cure it, it'll cure together and the pieces will just fit a little better. So that's how I would suggest fixing resin. Something to point out with this, if you're printing something hollow like I did for this hill giant, make sure you're curing the inside. I hear horror stories all the time of people who don't cure the inside, and then it starts to leak a year later. You know, liquid resin starts coming out of the inside, or it falls apart and it gets weak. Just make sure that you're curing the inside of your resin prints. And especially when the back's open like that, get in there, cure it. You got a lot of light to do it, and then fix it and put it together any way that you can. Now, when it comes to FDM, one of the things that I love the most about FDM is that it is a very forgiving material most of the time. Yeah, it can be a little brittle, it can be a little frail, you know, you're not going to be hammering things with FDM, but it's easy to repair because it's plastic. And at the end of the day, all you have to do is weld it back together. You know, if you're printing something and a wing doesn't turn out, well, guess what? Reprint that wing and just weld it onto the unit. And when I say weld, what I mean is something like this. This is just a little soldering iron. It was like $5 at your local store, right? And it just gets really hot. And then using the filament that you have, whatever you have, just put a piece down where you want to do it and just rub this back and forth on that piece until it melts nice and good, and then just kind of keep moving. It's like you're welding it, like literally you're a welder. Okay, but you're welding with plastic. And honestly, I cannot tell you how many things I have fixed because of that. And it doesn't have to be tiny things. It doesn't have to be miniatures. It can be large things. It can be the wing of Tiamat the dragon. It can be your house that you 3D printed. There are certain things that you can just weld back together. Now, some prints, I'm going to be honest and say it, if you have a clogged nozzle and you print and your print comes out and it's feathery and spongy and you can kind of smush it down, there's not a lot you can do. It just printed that way. I would reprint it. If you're willing to go the distance and do the work, you can fill it in with a really thinned down glue and just kind of go over the top of it back and forth and just fill it in as best you can with like a brush. And in the end, it will be pretty solid. But with the prices of FDM and things like that, don't look at it as you're losing all this money because of the filament, because if it printed out poorly like that, chances are it only used a fraction of the filament that it was supposed to anyway. So you might as well clear that nozzle and get it right. And then just like with the resin, milliput, those clays and things like that, they will stick to that PLA. You can glue them on if you want to. They will harden right up, and after you prime it, you won't even be able to tell that those blemishes are there. So if a print fails, don't get discouraged. Yeah, it sucks. Yeah, it's going to be extra work for you, but most of them are fixable. And if something's not fixable, if you print a zombie and only half the zombie prints, guess what? Now you have a zombie on the ground with no legs, just like the one in Walking Dead. And they're perfect. They're great to use. Use it that way. You have a monster and you need a corpse on the ground, you've got one. Any failed print can be reused somewhere else, almost always. Okay, are there exceptions to that? Of course. Some of the stuff that we print is so particular that you aren't going to be able to find a place to use it, but most of the places you can. FDM, just like resin on the build plate, if you put what you need to be there, it will print it. It will support what is above the build plate. So anything below will not print. Anything to the left or the right, it will not print. So just kind of learn how to use that, make it your friend. And a lot of the time, just fixing the orientation of your model and hitting that print again will stop the failure. Make sure your printer's level. Cannot tell you how often that's the issue. And if you struggle with that, get an auto leveling system. And that's it. There's not that much to it. It's generally pretty easy to fix. If you haven't tried milliput, if you haven't tried that stuff, give it a try. It's way easier than I thought it was ever going to be. So my question then to you is, what do you do to fix your prints? How do you fix things that break, or when something doesn't print at all that you need? What are you doing to make up the difference? And what fixes are you the most proud of? Let me know down in the comments, and I would love to hear about anything that you've fixed and how it went and what tools you've used. When I did the milliput, I honestly only used toothpicks and a small sculpting tool that I got in something that I bought, some paintbrush set or something like that. And it went really well. I wasn't using like the silicone. I wasn't using any fancy tools. It was just simple tools. So let me know what tools you think I should buy if I don't have anything yet, and what works for you. The worlds we build aren't always going to be perfect. So just make sure that you don't spend all your time making those worlds, fixing those worlds, that you forget to spend a little bit of time in them. As always, please like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Let us know what we're doing right. Let us know what we're doing wrong, because we would love to hear it. So thank you for joining us today. And like I said, tune in next week if you'd like to learn how to paint some fur, because that's what we're going to be doing. Until then.